get a job and you want to keep the job as long as you want to keep it, right? What you have to guard against is two things you have to guard against. The first is taking your own motivations, what led you to come to the University of Georgia and think that you wanted to be a social studies teacher, and you have particular values that you think you're going to, or values and other kinds of assets you're going to bring into the classroom. You have to protect yourself against internalizing the dominant values in the institution of the school, or the dominant values that are represented in the discourse around schooling, whether it's about testing or curriculum or whatever. That is, what can happen is, in order to be validated and to feel like you are accepted as a teacher, there's a temptation to internalize the social mores that define what a school is. Internalized adjustment. You don't want to do that. So that means you have to be aware and thinking about what are these discourses that are going on, that are shaping the way I'm thinking about the school. And this is going to go in terms of an evaluation of you in terms of value-added measures or whatever it is. You know, what is this? What's going on around me? The other thing that you don't want to do is, as a new teacher, and even as an experienced teacher probably, is think you're going to strategically redefine what goes on in a school. That is, like if you come in and you're some firebrand radical of whatever ideological position you want to choose, and think you're going to transform your classroom, you're going to transform your department, you're going to transform your school into something else. That's going to send you out the door. So what you have to do is you have to think about in a very, not so much in a tactical way, strategically, how do you comply with what's demanded of you? Where are the liminal spaces? Where are the cracks that exist that allow you to exploit your workplace, your classroom, to achieve the goals that you want to achieve? And what is it that I absolutely cannot change and I'm going to have to submit to? And if you think that way, you have, I think, a much better chance of actually becoming the teacher that you want to be. And I think this applies, and I'm not talking about, I'm not trying to make you mini-me's. I'm not trying to, it's fine if you want to pursue that, it's all right, but that's not my goal. What I would rather you do is to think about who is the teacher that I want to be. This is the image that I've constructed, and it's going to be kind of a moving target if you're a beginning teacher, if you're a novice teacher, because every year you're like at a different plane. You're like learning and figuring out who it is you want to be. But the real important gap that you want to look at is, what does my practice look like now? And then thinking about what's the ideal of my practice? What do I want my practice to look at, and to not lose sight of that? And if you can do that, and you think about that process and where you have to comply, and exploring the places where you can pursue your own agenda, if you will, and hopefully it's an agenda that's on the side of the students, that looks at, this is something that I talk about in the paper with Dangerous Citizenship, that notion is that we're thinking about what's in the public interest, what's in the interest of the collective that we're working in, not just some individual interests that we're trying to foist on someone else, but something that is collaborative and working towards a positive goal for a group of people, right? Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
That's kind of strategic. The tactics in that situation, you have to figure out in the context that you're in. And that's still the way I think about my own teaching, yeah.
You just described that. That sounded like a very individualistic process for an individual teacher. And I was immediately invoking in my mind that kind of work would have to be done with allies and with me having a connection to who had inspired me to have that myself, where I would environment?
Yeah, well, I agree with you, and I don't mean it to. I think the way I said it is individual to him. But what are the cracks that exist? Where are the spaces that exist in any place? And I think it does have to be. It's best if it's collaborative. Certainly, you move closer to being able to strategically redefine your work if you've got more than one person working for you. So, I mean, my best example of that I've personally been involved in is a group that Todd mentioned called the Rouge Forum. And we came together. There were some people in whole language and literacy instruction, some people that were radical inclusionists in special education, and some people that were very interested in creating more democratic kinds of spaces in social studies education. And it started with a small group of people that met in Detroit back in 1997 or 1998, just 10 or 15 people, and we didn't even have a name. But we've continued to exist, and we basically support one another in local projects in ways where we try to be collaborative and supportive. We've had some success in different areas, in resisting standardized testing and doing opt-out kinds of programs and that sort of thing. I think that you're absolutely right, that kind of collaboration is key. But when you first start out teaching, we're the whole model, still the dominant model of schooling is this egg crate kind of approach where we're in a classroom, us and 30 kids. And I know when I was teaching at North Springs, even though I had really good colleagues and colleagues that were actually really great models as social studies teachers, and I'll call some of them out, not that I think you know them, but just because they need to be called out. Jane Circadakis and Tom Wolfe and Bobby Macris, who were all experienced teachers that I saw doing it on their own. And I remember I would go back to my little apartment there just north of the perimeter at night and try to figure out what it is I'm going to do tomorrow. It takes a while in order to, at least it did for me, to feel confident in myself to even approach someone else to say, these are the problems I'm having. These are the issues I'm facing. Because of the presentation of self that everybody wants to make, that everything's chill, I've got it all under control. And that's the way, that's kind of filtered through my own experience. But I agree with you 100% that finding collaborators, thinking about whether it's in a model of collaborative action research or finding a small group of people in your school or even outside, some kind of teacher group outside of your school, or even a community group like a parents group of parents who are interested in and engaged in issues that you're interested in engaged in and getting involved are absolutely the ways to go.
I'll just add
Sure.
that was going to be the second part of my question that you got to, but collaboration with community members, parents, students, and just wondering where you see inquiry or collaborative inquiry playing a role with other educators, with parents, with people in the community.
But I think it's essential if you're going to create change. If you're going to create change, it could be with. Now I know that the unions aren't as strong down here as they are I was a member of the AFT, which is a anti-democratic, neo-fascist union. I want to say I was a member of New York State United Teachers for 15 years, and I worked in a democratic stream within my union. With the union leadership trying to keep rank and file members under their thumb. But you might find yourself, if you are in a situation where there is a union, you might find that there are like-minded people. And in British Columbia, there are streams within the union and the teachers union in British Columbia that are great places to do that kind of work. And we found in the work of the Rouge Forum, we've collaborated with parents who don't want their kids tested, every week, that building relationships with them. We were quite active in the early 2000s in Chicago and movements to do away with what was then called the CASE exam in Chicago, and also in Washington State against the Washington State exam. And we all saw in the last couple of years what happened in Seattle with the teachers refusing to offer the test there, that those kinds of events, those kinds of settings are just, those are the for me, those were the kinds of people I was drawn to. And so these are the people I want to work with and find out what their struggles are, and then I can share what my struggles and concerns are, and we can work together. You got scratching your nose, or are you? Mary.
As a civics teacher and an American government teacher, even as a history teacher, I found some little themes always there to help. Critical questioning, analytical thinking. Those were always strong. Like I picked that up somewhere in my teacher education. But I've been thinking lately now, not as a teacher, and I'm wondering how teachers can handle this. We've been hit with some big bombs in the United States, and I'm thinking of the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, and I've thought of that more and more over the last couple of years. How would I handle that in school? It demands so much understanding of court philosophy changes, of how the court is operating, how the court is armed. And then Congress itself, is it ever going to be able to do anything with Citizens United? Will we always be dominated by it? And now, the election process, to me, is absolutely amazing. I never imagined that corporate money and seeing corporations as people would ever come to be in the way it has.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, how would you go at it? That's another question.
You know, I think you answered the question, Mary. I really think you answered the question already. I mean, you have to, what we have to start doing, for example, when I talk about, we have to make being facile about teaching democracy difficult. So we have to stop thinking that we can just talk about the American creed, and we can talk about the ideals that are embodied in the Declaration of Independence and to a lesser extent in the Constitution, but there's good stuff in the Constitution too. But although the Constitution does set up property over people for the most part, and read the Federalist Papers too, right? And so we can bring the analytic questioning. We have to start actually being serious about investigating beyond, and this is a critique of my own when I was a teacher, although I was never allowed to, I never stayed around long enough to be able to teach American history, but I did teach world history. When we start to teach about American government and civics, we have to start making those institutions the subject of investigation rather than thinking we can just draw off of the tropes and the ideals that we're so comfortable and familiar with and just bring them into the classroom and distribute them as they are. We have to start putting them up against, we look at the Declaration of Independence and we have to put it up against Ferguson. We have to start thinking about national security, and we have to ask questions about civil liberties. We have to do that, and we have to do it in a way, we have to do it pedagogically. I'm not talking about just bringing up political ideology, because really there's a lot of things in terms of politics outside of schools that my Marxist friends, my hardcore Marxist friends in England, they don't even, when they talk about Marxist educators, I'm not even in the list. Ross is just not orthodox enough. My anarchist friends, they think, well, Wayne's not really an anarchist either, So a lot of times what we do is we just think in these orthodox ways. And what we have to try to do is unearth those principles a little bit. We have to say, well, instead of using that label Marxist or anarchist or democratic, we have to start peeling the layers of the onion. And we have to think in a way that's contrary to what, not that we necessarily want to be contrarians, but in that very narrow social studies sense, but having the contrarians around forces us to articulate in different ways what we mean by this is a democracy, or this is what citizenship is. And what in my experience, and I'm not saying this in your experience, but in my experience, I think we have become kind of lazy on that. That we've appealed to a heritage and a history that we have as U.S. people. And I say that intentionally because not everyone experiences all the rights of citizenship. And those can become points from which we actually inquire and we ask students. We don't give students the ideal. We don't pitch them the greatness of the United States. We ask them to engage in looking at, observing, and making judgments about what the case is. They have to decide what ought to be the case. That is a value-based argument. And that's okay. And if we can actually start to look at cases and then have discussions about, well, is this good? Is this bad? Is this the way it should be? Does it match up with our ideal representation? Then I think we start a pathway not to solve Citizens United, but at least get a different kind of discourse going. Yeah.
Doesn't that presume a rational thinker, though? And we all know that when it comes down to our most passionate engagements, that our ability to be rational thinkers in those situations is much more difficult. And so for people, teachers or students who have deep attachments and histories and narratives that they bring with them, how, in your view, do you engage that part of the American psyche or whatever? If that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, that's a really hard question to answer, Jim. I mean, it's... Stop watching the news. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Stop watching the news. If you see a book and you think you're not interested in it and it's on, politics or whatever, buy it and read it anyway. You've got to consciously move in ways, you've got to kind of experience Derive. You've got to kind of get outside of yourself. For me, and I can only answer personally, I don't know if I'm an example of a rational person or not, but reading Chomsky was useful for me. And thinking about his declaration, it was not really a declaration, but his articulation of a concept called thought control in democratic societies. And when I first ran across that, I thought, what the heck is that? Thought control in a democratic society? That doesn't exist. But then reading Necessary Illusions had a big impact on me. And then I started thinking, more seriously about, okay, what is the mass media offering? And then starting to think about, there's like his work with Edward Herman on manufactured consent. And then I started to think about, for me, that was kind of compartmentalized as a media thing. And I read that because I was a person interested in politics and media. And then one day, finally it occurred to me that curriculum is about manufactured consent. And that in fact, the Herman and Chomsky model of propaganda analysis could actually be used to look at the social studies curriculum in quite effective ways. So I think we do have to open ourselves up from the, and try to realize that there are, that we are subjects of, we're the targets, you people in here, teachers, professors, we're in a class that's an exceptional class. We're in the political class, and we are targeted more than anybody else with propaganda about what is, isn't, or what should be or shouldn't be. And we have to turn those those lights, that investigative floodlight back onto ourselves. I think that's, and I know I'm maybe getting back to the individual, but for me, that's what I had to do. There was a question back here and then talk, yeah.
So, in thinking about teaching, we're not in a vacuum by ourselves, right? So how do we help students also navigate the irrational thoughts that they have in approaching?
I think one of the ways, and Alan, maybe I'm going to sound too facile on this one, but this is what I think. I really think that the little principle I offered earlier in terms of guiding your own teaching, you want your students to develop personally meaningful understandings of the world. That means that the understandings of the world that they have to be meaningful to them. And they might not be rational. But I have faith in humanity, and that's irrational, that's metaphysical, that's an irrationality. I acknowledge that if we can get students to see that educative experiences that they can have in schools can be personally meaningful for them, that's what you want to do. And at the same time, you're thinking about that yourself. But when you're teaching your class, you're not really focused on your own meaningful understanding in terms of your pedagogy with your students. You are totally focused on your students. And that has kind of like a pedagogical implication. And I don't teach methods courses anymore because it's just been too long since I taught in a real classroom. I've been in the university too long. So, but what I try to do is I tell people that when you plan your lesson plan, most of the time, people want to go to planning what I'm going to do in my class today. Is that true? You think about when you write it, if you guys have done practicums or you write your lesson plan, what are you concerned about? You're concerned about what am I going to do? In fact, that's like the big core question of teaching on Sunday nights. What am I going to do till Monday? But what we have to do, one of the ways to kind of disrupt that, is not to think about what we're going to do, but we have to be thinking about what our students are going to do on Monday. What are the students in my class going to be doing? And if we can make that little turn, I think that's significant. And I think it gets our focus away from our own presentation of self, the teacher as kind of the center of the classroom, although the teacher still is the gatekeeper. But the teacher doesn't have to be talking as much as I'm talking tonight. You know, it's like if we can put the focus onto the students, we have a better chance of creating situations where students can develop personally meaningful understandings of the world. They have to have the space to do that. You have to create that space.
So I like your answer to Jim and her questions, but I think you have a better answer already presented in your slide. I thought you were telling us that these dangerous citizenship practices that kind of push beyond what Mary was talking about, or what many social studies reformers have been talking about, is that you talk about the healthcare problem, you analyze the assumptions, look at both sides, you think deliberately together. You're talking about creating practices that give space for emotion, for how you really feel or experience. So I think your answer is up here. You mentioned the contrarians, though. I was thinking about our conversation about Jim Lemmy and what he would say. One of his critiques of the kind of softer core social studies reform that emphasizes making a thoughtful classroom, making one that takes on controversial public issues, that gets students to use their mind. That's the soft core social studies reform, and you're trying to push that further. His critique of the soft core reform is, show me that it's ever worked. Give me some empirical evidence that getting kids in groups to deliberate about healthcare actually makes a meaningful influence on their learning such that they'll carry forward to a more democratic society. He says you soft core reformers are beating your head against the wall in pursuit of this thing that teachers simply can't do, nor should they do. Because what school's really good at doing, and we know this, and that's why schools look like they do, is we're good at telling a story and giving it to kids. And the soft core reformers get that critique from Lemming. If Lemming were here right now, he would say, show me the evidence that creating dangerous spaces does something even more.
I'm going to answer your question here if I can find my, but I've got to go on the internet. Oh no. Is that going to get me there? Come on. Anyway, I'll paraphrase. I'll give you one more DeBoard quote. And he's not talking about schools, but he's talking about revolutionary organizations. And he says the goal of a revolutionary organization is not to get its members to sit and listen to lectures by experts, but to get the people to speak for themselves. I think that's what dangerous citizenship is about. And it's about getting students to speak for themselves. I don't think leading, if healthcare is an issue, I mean, I think Lemming's right on that. Maybe the kids that want to talk about healthcare, let's let them talk about healthcare. But what about kids who want to talk about the body and sexuality, or they want to talk about poverty, or they want to talk about, their own life experiences, because that's meaningful to them. That's actually what becomes dangerous. It's when we deviate from the path of what the curriculum would say or what the textbook would say we should do. I don't have faith in kind of the liberals kind of rewriting the Texas curriculum. I'm not interested in that. I think it's horrid what happened with the Texas curriculum, but I don't think the answer is to get a bunch of liberals and Eric Foner down there to rewrite it. I don't think we should have it, frankly. I think teachers need the autonomy. They need to think about and see themselves not as, who are you accountable to? This is a question that I ask teachers. Who are you accountable to? Are you accountable to the government, to the state? Are you via the school board and the principal? Or are you accountable to your students? And if we start to think about ourselves as being accountable to a local school community, that in fact oftentimes that leads us in a completely different direction in terms of the way we go and what counts as like a meaningful conversation in this social studies class. So I'm not a softcore reformer. I don't know what I am, but I'm not a softcore reformer.
Hey, look, the tragic mistake was putting me in charge of watching time, and those of you who had me in class know I have no concept of time once we get involved in these discussions. It is 7:40.
Oops, sorry about that.
Perfect. Pam, if you want to ask the last question.
Just a little bit of advice for new teachers in the room, which I was in your shoes a few years ago. My methods professors, and please evaluate this is my question. As a way to keep your job, but ensure being critical, this is in Northwest Arkansas and similarities to the chicken industry. Please say critique the chicken industry in Georgia, and then hope that they'll make the connections back here. And in reality, I thought it was in a way a cop-out, very creative, but also a cop-out. But when you really think about it, it's the in-group, out-group. You're not going to be rational, you're not going to be logical about looking at your own community. Look at someone else's community, and you can bring that critique back home and help your students to be able to do that. And technical and Sherry Hill were experts at just picking issues, changing time period. Go back in time and look at it.
That's another little tactic that I think is useful. It's one that's actually used in Canada quite a bit. I won't tell you which direction they look.
Well, Wayne, thank you so much. I appreciate
Thanks for having me.